A hiring manager took one look at a job candidate, wrinkled his nose in disgust, and ended the interview in under 2 minutes. "We don't hire people who can't even maintain basic hygiene," he said. But 3 days later, he received a phone call that would haunt him for the rest of his life. This is the shocking true story of how one moment of judgment changed everything. And what he discovered about that smelly candidate will make you question every assumption you've ever made about people. Before we begin, I want to know, what city are you watching this from? Comment your city below right now. And if you believe we should never judge people by their appearance, hit that subscribe button. Because this story will change how you see every person you meet. Let's dive in. Rajiv Kapoor sat in his spacious office on the 7th floor of Techvantage Solutions in Bangalore, reviewing the day's interview schedule with growing irritation. As the head of human resources for one of India's fastest-growing IT consulting firms, he prided himself on efficiency, high standards, and maintaining the company's prestigious image. Today's schedule included 12 candidates for a senior software engineer position, and he was already running 20 minutes behind. The position was critical, a 6-month contract with possibility of extension, paying 50,000 rupees per month, requiring expertise in cloud architecture and database management. They'd received over 300 applications and had narrowed it down to these 12 candidates, all with impressive credentials on paper. Rajiv's job was to assess cultural fit, communication skills, and professional presence before passing qualified candidates to the technical team. The morning interviews had gone smoothly. Candidate after candidate arrived in pressed formal wear, carrying leather portfolios, speaking confident English peppered with technical jargon. Most came from top-tier engineering colleges, had worked at name-brand companies, and presented themselves with the polished professionalism Rajiv expected. By lunch, he'd advanced 5 candidates to the technical round and rejected 4 for various reasons: lack of confidence, poor communication, insufficient experience. After lunch, at 2:15 p.m., the receptionist called. "Sir, your 2 p.m. interview is here. Mr. Anand Kumar." Rajiv noted the 50-minute delay with annoyance, making a mental note on his evaluation sheet. He called the receptionist back. "Send him in." He expected the usual, a nervous candidate apologizing profusely for the delay, probably stuck in Bangalore's notorious traffic, trying to make a good impression despite the poor start. What walked through his door was nothing like what he expected. The man was probably in his late 30s, thin to the point of gauntness, wearing pants that were clean but clearly old and cheap, a shirt that had been washed so many times the color had faded to an indeterminate gray, and shoes that were held together with what looked like glue and hope. His hair was neatly combed but his face showed the weathering of someone who would seen hard times. And there was a smell, not overpowering but definitely present, the smell of someone who would travel far on public transport in Bangalore's heat, someone who couldn't afford regular laundry, someone whose circumstances didn't allow for the luxury of always being fresh. Rajiv's nose wrinkled involuntarily. His first thought, immediate and visceral, was, "This man doesn't belong here. Not in this office with its glass walls and expensive furniture, not in this company with its multinational clients and corporate culture, not in this professional environment where image mattered almost as much as competence." The contrast between this candidate and the morning's interviewees was jarring, almost offensive to Rajiv's sense of propriety. "Mr. Anand Kumar," Rajiv said, his tone already cooler than it had been with previous candidates. "You were 15 minutes late." The man, Anand, nodded apologetically. "Sir, I'm very sorry. The bus broke down, and I had to wait for the next one, and then," his Hindi was clear but his English was heavily accented, another mark against him in Rajiv's mental ledger. Rajiv held up a hand, cutting off the explanation. He'd already made his decision, really, in the first 30 seconds. Everything after would just be a formality. "Please, sit down," Rajiv said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. As Anand sat, the smell became slightly more noticeable, not unbearable, just the smell of poverty, of a long journey in crowded public transport, of circumstances that didn't allow for middle-class niceties like air conditioning and regular dry cleaning. Rajiv opened Anand's file, noting that on paper, the credentials were actually impressive. Degree from a Tier 2 engineering college, 8 years of experience at smaller companies, certifications in cloud technologies, project descriptions that showed real expertise. But Rajiv had long ago learned that paper credentials meant nothing if the person couldn't present themselves professionally. Image was everything in their industry. They sent consultants to client sites, to corporate offices, to meetings with executives. They couldn't send someone who looked and smelled like this. No matter how qualified he might be technically, he would reflect poorly on the company. Clients would judge them for sending such a candidate. Other employees would be uncomfortable. It was simply not workable. Rajiv went through the motions of asking a few basic questions. Tell me about your current employment. Anand explained he'd been laid off 3 months ago when his previous company downsized, had been searching for work since then, had a family to support. What interests you about this position? Anand's eyes showed genuine enthusiasm as he talked about the technical challenges, the opportunity to work with modern cloud architecture, his eagerness to contribute and learn. His technical knowledge, evident even in these brief answers, was clearly substantial. But none of it mattered to Rajiv. 2 minutes into the interview, he made his decision final. He closed the folder and looked directly at Anand with barely concealed distaste. Mr. Kumar, I'm going to be honest with you. At TechVantage, we maintain certain standards. Professional appearance and personal hygiene are basic requirements. I cannot in good conscience send someone to our technical team, let alone to client sites, who doesn't meet these basic standards. The words came out harsher than Rajiv had intended, but his irritation at having his time wasted had overcome his usual professional courtesy. Anand's face fell, the hope draining from his eyes. Sir, I apologize if I traveled very far today. The bus conditions were. If you could give me a chance to demonstrate my technical skills. Rajiv shook his head firmly. This isn't about technical skills. It's about presentation. I'm sorry, but this interview is over. You can show yourself out. He turned his attention to his computer, dismissing Anand without another glance, already thinking about the next candidate on his schedule. Anand stood slowly, his body language showing defeat. Thank you for your time, sir, he said quietly, his dignity somehow intact despite the humiliation. He left the office, closing the door softly behind him. Rajiv made notes on the evaluation form. Unprofessional appearance. Poor hygiene. Does not meet company standards for client-facing roles. Reject. He felt no guilt about the decision. If anything, he felt he'd done his job protecting the company's image. He moved on to prepare for the 3 p.m. interview without giving Anand Kumar another thought. The rest of Rajiv's day proceeded normally. He interviewed 4 more candidates that afternoon, advancing 2 to the technical round and rejecting 2 others for various legitimate reasons: insufficient experience, poor technical knowledge, weak communication skills. By 6 p.m., he'd completed his interviews for the day and was preparing to leave when his phone rang. It was Pradeep, the company's CEO, calling from his car. Rajiv, quick question. Did you interview an Anand Kumar today around 2 p.m.? Rajiv felt a flicker of surprise. Why would the CEO be asking about a specific candidate, especially one Rajiv had rejected in the first 5 minutes? Yes, sir. I did. I rejected him for not meeting our professional standards. His appearance and hygiene were not acceptable for our work environment. Why do you ask? There was a long pause on the other end. When Pradeep spoke again, his voice had a strange quality Rajiv couldn't quite identify. Rajiv, I need you to tell me exactly what happened in that interview. Every detail. What did you say to him? How did you reject him? The unusual intensity in the CEO's voice made Rajiv nervous. He recounted the interview, the candidate's late arrival, his shabby appearance, the smell, the brief questions, the quick rejection based on presentation rather than technical merit. Another long pause. Then, Rajiv, I'm coming back to the office. Don't leave. We need to talk. The call ended abruptly. Rajiv sat at his desk, a growing sense of unease settling in his stomach. Had he made some kind of mistake? Was Anand Kumar connected to someone important? Had there been a complaint? He reviewed his notes, trying to figure out what could have prompted this unusual reaction from the CEO. 20 minutes later, Pradeep arrived at Rajiv's office, his face showing an expression Rajiv had never seen before. A mixture of anger, disappointment, and something that looked like deep sadness. "Close the door," Pradeep said quietly. Rajiv obeyed, his nervousness increasing. Pradeep sat down heavily and looked at Rajiv for a long moment before speaking. "Do you know who Anand Kumar is?" "Really is?" Pradeep asked. Rajiv shook his head. "Just another candidate. His resume showed decent experience, but his presentation was completely unprofessional. I made the right call based on our standards." Pradeep's jaw tightened. "Let me tell you who Anand Kumar really is. He's the man who saved my daughter's life 7 years ago." Rajiv felt his stomach drop. Pradeep continued, his voice controlled but emotional. "7 years ago, my daughter Meera was 12 years old. We were returning from a family trip, driving on the highway near Pune, when our car had a terrible accident. The car flipped, caught fire. My wife and I were injured and trapped. Meera was thrown from the vehicle, unconscious on the road. Traffic was passing by. Everyone was watching, but no one stopped to help. Except one man. That man was Anand Kumar. He was traveling on a bus that was passing by. He made the bus stop, ran to the accident site, and pulled my daughter away from the burning car seconds before it exploded. Then he came back for me and my wife, dragging us to safety despite the danger. He stayed with us until the ambulance arrived, gave his contact information to the police, refused any reward when we tried to offer it later. He said, I only did what any decent person would do." Pradeep's eyes were glistening with tears. "My daughter is alive today because of Anand Kumar's courage. When I tried to reward him, to help him financially, to offer him a job, he refused everything. He said he was happy with his work, that he didn't save her for reward but because it was right. That level of character, Rajiv, is rare. I've never forgotten him. We've stayed in touch very loosely over the years, exchanged Diwali greetings, that sort of thing." 2 months ago, Pradeep continued, he reached out to me. He'd been laid off from his job. His wife was sick. His children needed school fees. He'd been searching for work everywhere with no success. He was embarrassed to ask, but he was desperate. I told him we had a position opening soon, and that he should apply when it was posted. I didn't tell HR about our connection because I wanted him evaluated fairly on his merits, not hired as a favor. Rajiv felt sick. The implications of what he'd done were starting to sink in. Pradeep wasn't finished. "This morning, I got a call from a hospital. Anand Kumar's wife's condition had worsened. They needed money for treatment urgently. He'd come to the interview despite this crisis because he desperately needed this job, needed any income. He traveled 3 hours by bus from his home to get here. He was late because the bus broke down, and he didn't have money for alternate transport. After you rejected him," Pradeep said, his voice harder now, "he went directly to the hospital to be with his wife. He didn't call me to complain about how he was treated. He didn't mention the interview at all. I only found out because I called him this afternoon to check if he'd interviewed yet. And when I asked how it went, he just said, quietly, that he wasn't selected. He didn't blame you. He didn't make excuses. He just accepted it with dignity." Pradeep stood up, looking at Rajiv with disappointment that cut deeper than anger. "You rejected the man who saved my daughter's life. You rejected a hero, a person of extraordinary character and courage, because he smelled bad after traveling 3 hours on public transport in this heat. You rejected technical skills and experience because of superficial appearance. You made a judgment about his worth based on circumstances beyond his control. And in doing so, you violated every value this company claims to stand for." Rajiv found his voice, though it came out weak. Sir, I didn't know. How could I have known? I was just applying our company standards about professional presentation. We've always emphasized that image matters in our industry. Pradeep shook his head. Image does matter, Rajiv. But character matters more. Technical skill matters more. Human decency matters more. And I'm not upset with you for not knowing his history. I'm upset because your judgment was so quick, so shallow, so completely lacking in basic human compassion. You didn't even give him a chance, Pradeep continued. You didn't ask why he was late, why his circumstances were what they were, what challenges he might be facing. You just looked at him, smelled him, decided he wasn't our kind of people, and dismissed him. That's not HR evaluation. That's prejudice. That's classism. That's exactly the kind of behavior that makes people like Anand Kumar invisible to people like us. Rajiv sat in silence, processing everything Pradeep had told him. The comfortable certainty he'd felt about his decision, about his professional judgment, was crumbling. Sir, I don't know what to say. I made a terrible mistake. Is there any way to fix this? Can we recall him, offer him the position? Even as he said it, he knew how inadequate the words were. Pradeep's expression softened slightly, though the disappointment remained. I've already called him. I've offered him a position directly, reporting to me, at a higher salary than the role you were hiring for. I've also arranged for his wife's medical treatment to be covered by the company. But that's not really the point, is it? The point is what this reveals about our hiring practices, about our values, about the gap between what we say we believe and what we actually do. He walked to the window, looking out at the city. You know what the saddest part is, Rajiv? Anand told me he understood. He said, Sir, I know how I must have looked. The HR manager was just doing his job. I don't blame him. Even after being humiliated, after being judged so harshly for circumstances beyond his control, his response was understanding and grace. That's the kind of person he is. That's the kind of person you dismissed in 2 minutes. Rajiv felt tears burning his eyes. Sir, please, let me apologize to him. Let me make this right somehow. Pradeep turned back to face him. You will apologize to him. Tomorrow. And then you are going to help me redesign our entire hiring process. Because if this happened to Anand Kumar, it's happening to countless other qualified people who don't have the fortune of knowing our CEO. We are losing talent because of superficial judgments. We are perpetuating inequality because of prejudices we don't even acknowledge we have. But more than that, Pradeep said, his voice intense, I want you to understand what you did today. You looked at a human being who was struggling, who was doing his best under difficult circumstances, who had traveled 3 hours with his sick wife at home to get a chance at employment, and you decided in 2 minutes that he wasn't worthy. Not because he lacked skills, you never checked. Not because he lacked character, you never looked. But because his poverty was visible and uncomfortable for you. The words hit Rajiv like physical blows. He'd never thought of himself as prejudiced, as classist, as someone who discriminated against the poor. He came from a middle-class background himself, had worked hard for his position. But Pradeep was right. He'd made instant judgments based on appearance, on class markers, on the visible signs of poverty. And he'd done it without even recognizing it as discrimination because it felt like maintaining standards. How many Anand Kumars have I rejected? Rajiv asked quietly, more to himself than to Pradeep. How many qualified people have I dismissed because they didn't look the part, didn't speak the right way, didn't present themselves according to my narrow definition of professional? The question hung in the air, unanswerable but haunting. Pradeep sat back down. That's the question you need to sit with, Rajiv. I'm not firing you. You are a skilled HR professional, and this company needs your expertise. But I am telling you that you need to fundamentally rethink your approach. Professional standards are important, yes. But they shouldn't be barriers that only people with privilege can clear. We need to ask ourselves, Are we hiring the best people, or are we hiring the people who can best afford to look professional? He continued, Anand Kumar has extraordinary technical skills. His previous employers gave him excellent references. He has certifications, experience, and proven abilities. None of that mattered to you because he smelled bad after a 3-hour bus journey. Think about what that means. We are excluding talented people not because they can't do the job, but because they can't afford the performance of prosperity. That's not merit-based hiring. That's discrimination with extra steps. Rajiv nodded slowly, the full weight of his mistake settling on him. You are right, sir. Completely right. I was so focused on image, on maintaining our corporate culture, that I forgot we are supposed to be judging people on their abilities, not their circumstances. I let my own prejudices and assumptions cloud my judgment. And I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Tomorrow, Pradeep said, Anand Kumar will come to the office for onboarding. I want you to be there. I want you to apologize to him directly, sincerely, and to hear his story in full. Not the story of how he saved my daughter, he probably won't even mention that, but the story of his career, his struggles, his expertise. I want you to see him as a whole person, not as a 2-minute impression. And then I want you to think about how many other people you've misjudged. As Pradeep stood to leave, he added one more thing. Rajiv, you made a mistake. A serious one. But mistakes can be opportunities for growth if we face them honestly. Use this. Let it change you. Let it make you better at your job, more conscious of your biases, more aware of how your judgments affect real people's lives. That's how we turn a terrible mistake into something valuable. After Pradeep left, Rajiv sat alone in his office for over an hour. He reviewed his notes from the day's interviews, seeing them with new eyes. The candidates he'd advanced were all from privileged backgrounds, all able to afford the markers of professional presentation. The candidates he'd rejected all had small marks against them. Wrong college, wrong accent, wrong clothes, wrong background. None of those things had anything to do with their ability to do the job. He thought about his own journey, how he'd been fortunate enough to attend a decent college, to have family support during his job search, to have the resources to present himself professionally. He'd always attributed his success to hard work and merit, never acknowledging how much luck and privilege had played a role. And he'd unconsciously been using those same privilege markers to judge others, creating barriers that excluded people who might be even more talented but lacked the same advantages. The next morning, Rajiv arrived at the office early, his stomach in knots. He'd barely slept, replaying the previous day's interview in his mind, cringing at his own words and actions. Pradeep had scheduled Anand Kumar's arrival for 10 a.m., and Rajiv had prepared carefully for the meeting. He'd written down what he wanted to say, though he knew no words could fully repair the harm he'd done. At 9:45 a.m., Pradeep called Rajiv to his office. Before Anand arrives, I want to tell you more about him. Not to make you feel worse, but so you understand the full context of who you judged so quickly yesterday. Rajiv listened as Pradeep shared Anand's story, growing up in a small village, losing his father young, working his way through engineering college while supporting his family, building a career through pure determination and skill, never taking shortcuts or asking for favors beyond what he'd earned. When his company laid him off 3 months ago, Pradeep explained, it wasn't for performance. They were downsizing, closing entire departments. Anand was actually one of their top performers. But he was supporting aging parents, a wife with a chronic illness, and 2 children in school. The layoff devastated him financially. He'd been applying everywhere, getting interviews based on his resume, then being rejected in person. Why? Rajiv asked, though he already knew the answer. Because, Pradeep said, his poverty had become visible. 3 months of unemployment means you can't afford new clothes when old ones wear out. It means you can't afford the bus fare to arrive fresh and composed. It means stress and worry are etched on your face. It means you smell like someone who's been traveling in crowded public transport, because you can't afford alternatives. And people like you look at those visible signs of struggle and decide, instantly, that the person isn't worthy. At 10 a.m., the receptionist called. Anand Kumar had arrived. "Send him up," Pradeep said. When Anand entered the office, Rajiv saw him differently than the previous day. Today, Anand was wearing slightly better clothes, probably borrowed, Rajiv thought, and looked cleaner, more composed. But what struck Rajiv most was the man's dignity. Despite yesterday's humiliation, despite his desperate circumstances, Anand carried himself with quite self-respect. "Anand," Pradeep said warmly, "thank you for coming. Please, sit. I want to formally introduce you to Rajiv Kapoor, our head of HR. Rajiv has something he'd like to say to you." Rajiv stood, his prepared speech suddenly feeling inadequate. He looked at Anand, seeing not just a rejected candidate but a human being who would endure suffering with grace, who would maintain his integrity despite hardship, who deserved so much better than the treatment he'd received. "Mr. Kumar," Rajiv began, his voice unsteady, "I owe you a sincere apology. Yesterday, I judged you based on your appearance and circumstances rather than your qualifications and character. I dismissed you in 2 minutes without giving you a fair chance to demonstrate your skills or tell your story. I made assumptions about who you were based on superficial observations. And in doing so, I was not just unprofessional, I was cruel. I'm deeply sorry." Anand listened quietly, his expression neutral. When Rajiv finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Anand spoke, his voice soft but clear. "Sir, I appreciate your apology. Truly. But I want you to know that I don't hold anger toward you. You didn't know my circumstances. You were applying the standards you believed were correct. I understand that in your position, you meet many people, and you have to make quick judgments. My only sadness is that I didn't get a chance to show what I could do." His grace in the face of rejection made Rajiv feel even worse. "But that's exactly the problem," Rajiv said. "I shouldn't have made such quick judgments. I should have looked deeper, asked more questions, given you a real chance. And I'm going to change how I evaluate candidates because of what I did to you. You deserved better, and so do many others who have probably been rejected for the same superficial reasons." Pradeep interjected, "Anand, I've offered you a position as Senior Solutions Architect, reporting directly to me. The salary is 75,000 rupees per month, and we'll cover your wife's medical expenses through the company health plan. I hope you'll accept." Anand's eyes widened. "Sir, that's incredibly generous. More than I could have hoped for. Of course I accept. Thank you. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Pradeep said. "But I also want you to know that this isn't charity. It's not just because you saved my daughter, though I'll never forget that. It's because you are qualified for this role. Your experience and skills merit this position. You earned it. The only reason you didn't get the original role yesterday was discrimination, not merit. I'm correcting that injustice." The rest of the meeting covered logistics, start date, onboarding process, team assignments. But what stayed with Rajiv was watching Anand's transformation as the reality of his situation sunk in. The tension in his shoulders eased. His eyes, which had held worry and stress yesterday, now showed hope and relief. A single job offer had changed this man's entire world, had saved his family from potential disaster. And Rajiv had almost prevented it from happening because of a smell. After Anand left to complete paperwork, Pradeep turned to Rajiv. "Did you notice something interesting? Even after I offered him the job, even after his circumstances improved dramatically, Anand didn't express any resentment toward you. He didn't take the opportunity to lecture you or make you feel worse. That's character, Rajiv. That's the kind of person you judged unworthy in 2 minutes." In the weeks that followed, Rajiv underwent a profound transformation. He worked closely with Anand, learning about his technical expertise, his problem-solving abilities, and his collaborative approach to projects. Anand quickly proved himself invaluable to the company, bringing both skills and a perspective of resilience that enhanced the entire team. But more than that, His presence served as a constant reminder to Rajiv about the dangers of superficial judgment. Rajiv began redesigning Tequantage's hiring processes with input from Anand and other employees from non-privileged backgrounds. They eliminated requirements that served as unnecessary barriers, mandates about specific types of degrees, preferences for certain colleges, and an emphasis on polish that really just meant class markers. They implemented blind resume reviews and trained all hiring managers on unconscious bias and the ways poverty and struggle manifest visibly. Most significantly, they created a second look program where any candidate rejected at initial screening could request a full technical evaluation regardless of their presentation. The program was Anand's idea. Give people a chance to prove what they can do, not just what they look like they can do. In the first year, the program identified 15 exceptional candidates who would have been rejected under the old system. Many had stories similar to Anand's, qualified and experienced, but marked by visible poverty that had triggered quick rejections. Rajiv also began volunteering at a local NGO that helped unemployed professionals from poor backgrounds. He used his own experience as a cautionary tale, openly sharing how he'd almost prevented a hero from getting employment because of prejudiced assumptions. The story of Anand Kumar's rejection and subsequent hiring eventually spread through Bangalore's tech community, and Rajiv used the attention to advocate for broader changes in hiring practices across the industry. 3 years after that fateful 2-minute interview, Tequantage had become known as a company that valued talent over presentation. Their employee retention improved dramatically, and their reputation in the industry strengthened. Anand Kumar thrived in his role, eventually becoming a vice president of engineering. He mentored young professionals from poor backgrounds and used his position to open doors for others who would face similar barriers. One day, a junior HR manager approached Rajiv and Anand nervously about a candidate who had presentation issues, worn clothes and a heavy regional accent. Rajiv recognized his younger self in these words. He proceeded to share the full story of his initial interview with Anand. The HR manager listened with growing understanding. Anand spoke up. Give him a real chance. Talk to him about his skills, not his clothes. Remember that presentation can be taught, but talent and character can't be bought. As the years passed, the impact of that 2-minute interview continued to ripple outward. Tequantage's Second Look program was adopted by several firms across India. Rajiv became a vocal advocate for humility and compassion, always returning to the same lesson. Every person struggling with visible poverty might be a hero, a genius, or a person of extraordinary character who simply hasn't had the breaks others received. That day, Rajiv would conclude in his speeches, I looked at Anand Kumar and saw a smelly, unprofessional candidate. I was wrong about everything. He had more character in his worn-out shoes than I had in my entire air-conditioned office. If I hadn't been forced to confront my prejudice, I would have spent my career excluding talented people and never realizing the harm I was causing. Today, 15 years after that interview, both Rajiv and Anand remain at Tequantage. The company has grown significantly, maintaining its commitment to inclusive hiring. Anand's wife recovered fully, and his children graduated from good universities through their own abilities. Every new HR employee at Tequantage receives training that begins with the story of the 2-minute interview that changed everything. The lesson endures. Never judge a person by their struggle. Look deeper, ask questions, show compassion, and give chances. Because the person you are dismissing in 2 minutes might be the person who could change your company, your perspective, and your life, if only you take the time to see who they really are.